Good afternoon, members and guests. Welcome to Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand's launch of What is the Future of Offshoring? I'm Peter De Kranis, Chair of the Victorian Corporate Advisory Panel. The Victorian Corporate Advisory Panel represents the interest of members in the corporate sector in Victoria and works to advance the opportunities of chartered accountants in business through recognition, networking, training and development, research, and the Chartered Accountants Program. The panel also acts in an advisory capacity to the Victorian Regional Council. The Victorian Corporate Advisory Panel and Chartered Accountants' objective for the business community and members in business is to maintain a focus on the training and development needs of chartered accountants, members, provisional members, and accounting professionals in the corporate sector. The panel has achieved some significant successes, including today's Future Inc. launch, a key involvement in the pilot and now launch of the Chartered Accountants Mentor Exchange Program, and the creation of a series of business insights for members. In addition, we're working on new initiatives for members in the business for 2016. Other networking forums we are involved with include sharing knowledge, building knowledge, and leading thinking event series. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce our moderator for today, Rob Ward, Head of Leadership and Advocacy at Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand. As Head of Leadership and Advocacy Australia and New Zealand, Rob is responsible for leading the policy team across a wide range of disciplines that impact businesses and the broader economy. He is a fellow of Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand and has over 40 years of experience working in practice, in regulation and in various board roles. Prior to joining Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand, Rob was a PwC worldwide audit leader, which covered 78,000 people across 148 countries. He has been chairman of the Australian Public Policy Committee and a board member of the Public Interest Oversight Board based in Madrid, the body charged with the independent oversight of the development of international standards of auditing, ethics and education. Rob has a Bachelor of Commerce in Accounting, Finance and Systems and from the University of New South Wales and was admitted as a member of the Order of Australia in 2005. So welcome, Rob.
Great. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Peter, and thanks everyone for coming along. And for anyone down there, I promise you I am here. So someone that's got this in the road, maybe it will move. Thanks. So thank you very much for the introduction and to all of you for this session. And we're looking forward to this dialogue on what will be an important topic. This is, as I head off into this, I'm going to do a couple of thank yous early because we could forget at the end. But within our Future Inc., we partner with the firms and other providers around the place on a whole range of these topics. And this one is with Deloitte. We do a lot of work with our friends at Deloitte, a number of those. And David Rubens, who's the principal author, he's a partner. David, thank you very much for his start on this. And it's great work as we head into this. And Karen McWilliams and Vern and Kyle in the whole of my team are just outstanding from this. So thank you as we head into this discussion. You know, Future Inc. is an important thing for us. When I joined our body, and for those of you who might remember, I was the president of our body in '98. So to actually be working here now is unusual, but it's an absolute privilege and I'm having a ball. And why is that? Because we've got great people. But we're taking this with Future Inc., we're working on, with policymakers, government. I've had conversations with the Prime Minister and others on all of the work we're doing about a plan for Australia and New Zealand's prosperity. You'll hear soon our whole release around the work, but everything is about this. And as you head into this session about offshoring, you're probably thinking about costs. I don't want you to think about that. I'm going to challenge you right now to think about how do I actually make this a part of how we can make Australia better. Now, we've had it within Future Inc., as we do, the various discussions and topics. Recently, we had one on digital disruption in Australia and New Zealand, launched in Auckland, 3,000 registrants around that disruption. Another one with Deloitte recently on diversity, and that's had 3,800 people been very popular on leading in a brave new world of diversity. Juliette Burke from Deloitte's an outstanding leader on that. We have a further launch of that tonight at the National Press Club, and a drawcard panellist is not Rob Ward, it's Bob Geldorf. So there seem to be more going to that, so his hair's a bit different to mine. But this one is critical for us in terms of, because I'm going to put this challenge to you, that the good times are possibly, and I'm an optimist, are possibly over. We talk about the mining boom, it has. Their living standards, you only look at the paper that's there with you, will drop in the next 10 years unless we do something about it. And the only people that are left to challenge it is us. And that's what this topic is about today. A little ad for the future. In February, we have the launch in Canberra of the Future of Work. And so if you look at digital disruption, how's that impacting us? One of our most recent ones of food farming in our future has had a great uptake. So we'd love you to engage in the debate in Future Inc. We'd love you to engage in it because we want to build our country's prosperity. And the only people who are going to do it is us. So today's topic is about offshoring. If I could mention, the media might be present. In particular, I don't know whether, is Agnes here in particular? Okay. Chatham House rules do not apply. I'm sensitive to that, and particularly, I said one of our speakers, particularly the banks, we need to be conscious of anything commercial in confidence. I'll protect that if I have to. I hope it won't come up, but there are some issues in that, so hopefully you'll forgive me for that. So before we get started, I'd like to introduce our panel, and thanks to the panel in advance for doing this. Down on my far left is Sneza Pelusi, who's a partner in Deloitte. She's head of Deloitte Private, sits on the executive committee of Deloitte, and will bring a perspective. She's a very experienced auditor, advisor. Like her, she's an auditor, I'm an auditor, and I'm exciting. But she actually brings a perspective, particularly from small business and her private clients, of how this is very important to their business. And thank you, Sneza, for participating on behalf of the firm. To her right is Scott Nichols, he's Director of Student Admin from University of Canberra and has an enormous amount of experience in outsourcing, and I'm going to ask them each to reflect upon this. Scott and I were chatting the other day. I only enjoyed that chat for 5 minutes. I think you'll love hearing from him about what's the opportunity to onshore. And I'm going to put a proposition before I introduce our next speaker that in fact, and David, every time I mention this to David, who's our principal author, his eye just rolled in the back of his head. He said, "Rob, you're smoking something." But I actually reckon in a disaggregated world in technology, the concept of offshoring is old. It's old. So it could be onshoring or no-shoring. And we'll talk a lot about that. And who would have thought in the education world how much we've onshored in the last, 5, 10 years? It's amazing. And then our next speaker is Andrew Moncur, who's head of all things. He's head of everything, actually. You're head of everything at the bank?
Absolutely.
Yeah, right. Yeah, great. So a lot of stuff, accounting, regulatory, shared services, the whole lot. So we'll bring quite a bit of experience. So we have a great panel and their full bios are here together. So again, thanks for participating. Opportunity for questions. But remember my challenge to you as we start this debate. What can you do differently in your businesses that will onshore, that will create work, that will create wealth? Let's start the discussion. Why don't we start by just a few comments about, maybe, Andrew, about 4 or 5 minutes about your journey at the bank, and then we'll get into some of the detail. Over to you.
Okay, thanks, Rob. So look, I've been involved with the bank for a long time. Around 2007, we started our offshoring agenda. Like most organisations, we started off very simple. So things like reconciliations, journal processing. It was like a toe in the water, just seeing whether this would work, how it would go. We're now at the point that we're actually doing end-to-end process. So It's getting to the point where people are completing reports, reviews, commentary, and then analysing that commentary and providing that back to the owners of, or the value owners of the data. Along that way, we had lots of hiccups, like most organisations when you're doing this. There's a few key learnings that we actually got out of it. A couple of those were around end-to-end. So initially when we moved activity offshore, if it was a 5-step process, we'd offshore step 1, 3, because you didn't trust that the offshore team would actually do the other components properly. What we found when we did that, the offshore team didn't actually understand what they were doing. They didn't get the context. So if you think about that, is no different than if you did that with members of your team onshore. You get exactly that same outcome. Once we moved to giving them end-to-end, we found there was the context and their understanding rapidly improved. But what we still found, there was still a tendency for the final step to be maintained by the onshore team. Where that happened, over time, you saw the activity start to progress back. So the onshore team started to pick up more work and the offshore team would sort of step further back away from it. Again, natural human behaviour. If you're responsible for, the example that I use, if you go to do a report for somebody, compared to doing the report and having to talk about it yourself, the level of effort you put into the two things are quite different. Same principle applies here. So what we found is we had to be very clear about the accountabilities. We had to be very clear on where the handoff points were. So in a situation like that, we've broken the 5-step process into 2 processes. One that's a 4-step process, which is entirely completed 100% offshore, very clean accountabilities, very clean handoff points, and then the 5th step is another 100% process, which is managed onshore. That gave us the distinction, which actually has really given us the uplift that we've seen in the last couple of years. So quite a long period of time it's taken us to get there, and hopefully for those of you who are looking to follow, you can leverage some of that experience to quickly get ahead of where we've spent a lot of time.
Okay. Scott.
Thanks. So the University of Canberra's journey in terms of offshoring started in 2007 when we had the dubious honour of reporting the largest deficit of a Commonwealth-supported university in the history of Australian universities. Unfortunately, I think we still hold that claim and hopefully we'll lose that soon to somebody else's detriment. But so our Vice-Chancellor, who was new at the time, brought in some consultants to look at how we could do things differently. One of the obviously options was to look at outsourcing and or offshoring and look at what we call it in UC the usual suspects of outshoring, which is ICT, ITM, accounts payable, accounts receivable, payroll, etc., etc. But we then went further and we've actually, in a very unique way, outsourced key university process to offshore processes as well. So anybody who now applies for a course at UC, whether it's undergraduate, postgraduate, whatever, 80% of that coursework, application work, is done offshore in a team in Chennai. So that journey has been 7 years so far. It has been very interesting and reflects on a lot what Andrew was saying in terms of some of the learnings. The main lessons for us is that the drivers for us were capability and capacity. Capacity being, can somebody else do this faster, cheaper, better than we can? But also, could we partner with someone who has 100,000 plus employees, lots of different organisations, and could they help us look at the processes that we were offshoring and improve those processes where we couldn't do it ourselves because we're just too close to it? In the last 2 or 3 years, the second part of that has come true. So to the great credit of our offshoring team, the maturity of the relationship has now meant that they're actually shedding staff because they've actually helped us improve our processes to be more efficient than what they were previously. And that includes greater use of technology as it does in terms of just looking at processes that might have been 12 steps, 12 stages that only need to be 8. There are huge challenges in terms of offshoring, which I'm sure I'm not telling anybody that has done this won't know. And I guess just as a summary, and I'm happy then to take questions when that comes around about it, our reflection is the 2 main drivers or the 2 main challenges are around culture and communication. You can never underestimate the challenges that cultural differences allay, especially, and I'm not sure if people have worked with, we work with a company in India You can ask them anything and they'll never say no. What will actually happen is, over time, the evidence will be that they can't do what they said they were going to do, but they'll never tell you no. So there's a maturity around having a conversation to be able to say to an offshoring partner, if it's no, tell us no, and help us work through how that no can be turned into a yes. And communication, the barrier of distance, the barrier of time zones and those sorts of things is the other ongoing challenge.
Well, it's understanding differences in cultures, right? And when no means I don't know. So, yeah, Sneza.
Thanks. In terms of timelines and experiences, I mean, a couple of comments that have already been made are not dissimilar in our world within Deloitte as well. We've been on a journey for a similar time frame, and obviously during that time frame, as our experience in using a workforce that isn't immediately outside your office, it has changed the way people operate. Interestingly, in terms of some of the benefits that we've seen from it, I mean, one of the things you mentioned, Scott, was around time zones. That's actually worked to our advantage in many cases in terms of being agile in responding to client needs. As our workforce here tends to want to go home and finish off, we have a facility offshore where you have the time zones that actually work to your advantage. So there is an agility aspect to it. The piece around the agility piece has actually been really important as well, and being able to access resources at peaks where, from an economic sense, forgetting the arbitrage like for like, just from an economic sense, having to scale up for peaks, in particular in our, in my service line from a Deloitte Private perspective, you have audit compliance, you've got accounting compliance, tax compliance. There are certain times of the year where it's just simply impossible to scale up to that large extent to meet those needs in a feasible way. So it does allow you to be agile and flexible with your workforce. But we've also got learnings from it ourselves, interestingly, in dealing in an offshore environment.
As the firm itself?
As the firm. One of the things I was commenting earlier to both Scott and Andrew was, prior to engaging in an offshore facility, when we used to think about mobility from an Australian sense, we would think, well, we've got excess capacity in Perth and we need to put them on a plane and fly them across and accommodate them in Sydney and Melbourne or wherever across the country. Yet engaging in a process where you're actually engaging and sharing methods and tools and communicating with teams in a facility that's actually overseas has actually made us a lot better from a mobility perspective here in Australia as well. So the benefits of it have been more than just the particular circumstances around dealing offshore. My final comment is, and again, this is a learning over many years, that it can't be a set and forget strategy. It can't be a strategy, to go to your earlier comment, that's set around an arbitrage and then you leave it. We're constantly thinking about, how do I engage with my team that is not sitting outside my office? How do they feel connected and part of what we're delivering to the client? How do they feel valued and appreciated as part of the workforce? So the language we use is, they are part of your workforce, they just happen to be sitting in a different part of either the country, if it's the mobility piece earlier, or outside of the country. And that in itself has been an important part. So whether you build that through reciprocal secondments, through other means of communication, and technology has made it a lot easier in terms of being able to speak to each other. But that important piece of feeling connected and part of the team has been a really important part of making it work. So you do need to invest. It can't just be a set and forget strategy. You have to look at it as you do every part of your business, and how am I going to invest in it?
That's excellent. On your tables are the papers, which is the sort of the red document, and you'll see a lot of the facts and figures in there. And one of them is that for Australia, that our offshoring costs, sort of the out, is 14 billion, but 11 billion in. Right? So now I bet my bottom dollar when we started on this, it was, would have been 14 billion out and nothing in, just to get it started. So, and I'll give you an example. In my time, I spent $500 million of the firm's money re-engineering our audit working papers. We also got and Deloitte were way ahead of us at the time on our delivery centre for disaggregated stuff. So we're disaggregating everything to Russia and India. Within 1 year, one of the processes was back onto my onshore in Miami. 1 year. It had broken stuff and started to come back. So the first driver, let's just talk about the old driver, cost. Is that a driver now, cost? Is that the main driver?
Look, I wouldn't say it's the main driver. The reality is cost still plays a part, right? To me, the main driver is around, it forces change. It forces you to document, and that's one of the critical things. If you all look at yourselves, when you move from one job to another, was there process documentation for you to pick up and follow? Or how did you learn that? You learnt it off the person before you, so you learnt their bad habits. Going to offshore, what it means is you actually document the process, you check that independently that it can actually be reviewed. It actually starts to create a knowledge repository for the organisation. So a lot of people often say moving activity offshore means you lose knowledge. I actually have the other view. I actually think it creates knowledge. It actually gives us a knowledge repository that we have that can move from one individual to another individual. It means organisationally we can actually move from one offshore partner to another offshore partner because we actually have all of the documentation. We never had that when it was onshore. We never had it here because people don't like to document.
Scary. So that's good. That's true. Unfortunately, Scott.
I think
Costs.
Yeah, look, I think the main thing for us is it's also about reflecting on the environment in which you operate. So Canberra is a very competitive environment for staffing. There's high turnover, there's high recruitment costs, there's high competition in terms of the public service, defence, etc., etc. So for us, it was also a decision not just about cost, and I agree cost is a factor but not the driving one. It was about the ability to come up with a sustainable workforce and a workforce that you could work with over a longer period of time to do exactly what we've been talking about, which is develop processes, understand processes, improve processes rather than deal with what we have in our own backyard, which is a continual recruitment personnel changeover strategy, which doesn't actually help you get very far very quick.
And that's the agility piece that I touched on earlier. So similar to Scott's experience. So from a Deloitte Private perspective, we are in, you name a city across Australia, and you're likely to find us. So Alice Springs, Darwin, Canberra, Launceston, Hobart. So in the short term, when you need resources quickly, it is hard to scale up quickly. So we tend to have a parallel. We'll go and look locally in terms of what we need, but as immediate short term, I need a resource straight away. It is ability to tap in and be agile in terms of your response around resources. Look, I absolutely agree with the comment around process and that whole part about the codification of what we do. It actually has been a driver of codifying practices.
So that's a big benefit, right?
It is a big benefit, and we, as part of engaging offshore, we had a whole project. We called it the ATC project, Accounting Tax Compliant Projects, which was about standardising how we did things across the country, and engaging in an offshore partner actually really became an important part of doing it. There was another reason why we needed to be really clear around the processes for everyone as they came in through the organisation. So I think the point is very valid. Often we think about just cost like-for-like arbitrage, but the benefits back are significant as well.
Excellent. And that's a really important point as we start this discussion. Maybe it started as costs, but then the benefits started to flow. And we've sort of touched on cultural and people issues. Let's explore some of the learnings around that. I've heard some already about the way dialogue happens. When does no mean I don't know? Or have you seen changes in the maturity of your offshore providers, and has that created challenges in its own right? Love some comments on how to deal with the cultural and the growth aspect of so-called offshoring.
I think it's an interesting question because often we start from the premise that people don't know each other. They haven't got that build-up of rapport and knowing, how people operate, etc. I think in early days, it's very easy to go, that didn't work well because something happened, with the offshoring partner. An important reflection is, how are we communicating? What have we done as part of that? What is our own view around how we're engaging in the process? What are the assumptions that we've brought to the table as well? So it's actually been an opportunity to reflect in terms of how we engage and how we have also engaged with the other party, as opposed to just looking at it in terms of how they're responding to us and what our view is of, I mean, we've touched on some of the cultural nuances on the other side, but what are our own cultural nuances that may actually contribute to that? So it's actually been an interesting opportunity to explore how we both work together.
Right.
The other piece is where we are engaging significantly with an offshore partner, the ability to have people go and visit the centre as a conduit to spreading what it looks like to other parts of the organisation as well. And that's been really important, to go and visit and engage with the teams and put names to faces, rather than just dealing with, or faces to names, I think I should have said, rather than just engaging with names and the like. So really, it's making it personal and dealing with it as you would any other people engagement strategy. So that's been our...
And I think I'd add to that, one of the things we had to deal with was in the very early days was the us versus them mentality. So as soon as something went wrong, it was very quickly pointed at the offshore team, it must be about them. So we've done a lot of work about the culture of one team, that they're working for us, they're just working somewhere else. And it's also been interesting to watch the maturity of the offshore team. So one of the roles that we offshore is government regulatory reporting. So how many students have we got, how many staff have we got at the various different points in time. And when we started doing this, the response we got was, okay, we've run the report, here are the errors, tell us what to do. The actual phrase that we joke about internally was that the email would always come back with, please do the needful, which was tell us what to do. So that was the first 1 or 2 or 3 years. But now the relationship is so much matured that this government reporting is, the emails you get now is, we've identified these areas, we think these are the solutions to those areas, can you just confirm that we're on the right track? So it's a maturation that it's basically no different to them being 10 feet outside my office than on the other side of the world. They now understand their business, they understand the expectations of them working for us and what we have to achieve.
What about as an extension of that, and maybe, Andrew, come to this point, have you seen where your, I'll use the word offshore teams, have grown beyond the job, have matured to a level that in fact they're not interested in doing it anymore, and now you've got a problem?
Well, yes. No, yeah.
I haven't seen that yet.
You haven't yet?
I expect that will come, but at this point in time, that hasn't actually occurred.
Well, that's good.
Absolutely. I guess one of the points that I did want to bring up from the last conversation was, you actually need to understand the culture of the area that you've offshored to. So we spend time in India, and the reality is you actually have to have the right level of person visit, because India is a very hierarchical culture. So if you send low-level staff over, they actually don't get any attendance by the team over in India. It's actually got to be senior people go over and do the visit to actually play into that culture of where you are. So understanding that culture is absolutely critical to enabling your offshore to be successful.
Yeah, in terms of the individual who is leading from a Deloitte Private perspective and the team that we engage with, he's currently being considered for another role promotion. So it's the same dynamic. There is progression within the teams, and you're dealing with the same sort of dynamic around people growing and developing and taking on different roles. So, and we're incredibly proud of that. That's great. That is something. The individual that I spoke of was here actually in the country on a development course last week, and I couldn't be prouder of the fact that he's been considered for a more senior role within the organisation, because he's been incredibly successful in the current role.
What about the, and I'm thinking about this as, I'm now a client of PwC, right? PwC does my tax returns. Pretty expensive, actually. But anyway, it's a very good job. But a lot of it is done in India, and I don't know the person. And I talk to our guys. I've got a great partner, Alice Case, and others who work on it. You got any comments on the relationship of the customers or your clients to those teams? Is there a veil wall that some smart way you handle that? Do you talk about your non-physically present team members?
So I think I'd handle that a bit differently. The reality is there is no difference between a person in India, in the Philippines, and a person here in Australia, right? People communicate nowadays with technology, email, telephone, same time, FaceTime, and it's about using that technology to actually give that presence.
Right.
A critical component of that is what I mentioned before around end-to-end process and understanding. And it's about the person that is actually doing the work, being able to talk to the whole picture of that work, not a partial picture. And to be able to have that conversation with the area they're providing the service to directly, and giving that confidence. And confidence is critical. And that's especially for Australia. Some of the other cultures, you don't have to be as confident. But for Australia, we need people to give us confident, positive answers for us to feel comfortable that they're actually doing the work at the right quality. And what we need to build is processes around that to enable that confidence to come through. And the way we've done that is by having those really clear handoff points, having very clear checklists around what needs to be delivered, so that it gives the confidence of control, it gives the confidence that the process has been run effectively. The customer group can sit down and go through the whole process and understand where the control points are, add extra controls in, and then we're able to report on that to actually say we are managing this appropriately. So slightly different way of answering your question, but
No, that's good.
That's been my experience.
Big business and small business. So, is offshoring just for big business? You gave me an example where it's not.
Yep. No, the example that I had, my wife's a chartered accountant, does self-managed super fund audits, and her firm had an email from a Vietnam offshoring company offering to actually do their self-managed super fund audits. So I think the days of it being a large organisation, large-scale operations and things moving have passed. I think it's everything. And I know I keep bringing up the word process and around that, but I actually think that's been the critical enabler, is because people have documented, we're clear on what needs to be done, we're moving away from that memory of people having to remember how to actually complete a function and how to do it because it's down in paper. And you can then hand that to anyone, whether that's somebody onshore, whether that's somebody offshore, it's there. And the uplift in the technology means that you can manage the communication much easier. You know, if you go back 20 years ago, the telephone dropout when you were talking offshore, you know, big delays on the telephone line, they're gone. They don't happen anymore. Video conferencing is now working very well. You know, 5-10 years ago, you used to have all the pixels coming through. That doesn't happen. So the technology is coming up that's actually making us a much more enabled workforce. Probably most of you here work from home regularly. There's actually no difference when you think about it, working from home or working from another city or another country. You still log on, you're still accessing, you've still got your telephone. How many of us, you know, you're talking to a colleague who's 2 floors below you, you pick up the phone and you ring. You don't actually physically go and walk. So the technology is enabling us to essentially operate the same way that we operated when people were here.
Excellent. So this is not just big business, it's all business, right? All business, and I think it's very important. I would like to get to a couple of issues, one of quality and one of onshoring, that is the opportunity, in a second. Before I do, I'm going to ask you, and you'd have to, not a long answer, I haven't given you notice about this one. What's the one thing that's gone wrong, that may be wrong, that you had to fix?
Only one.
Just choose one. You must have, look, I'm the only person that's perfect and never made a mistake in my life. You know, we've all made mistakes. So what's the one lesson?
I won't go into the mistake.
No, don't go into the detail. Just
the nightmares might come back. No, but I think the lesson is definitely around that communication piece.
communication.
It has to be around communication. And it comes to Andrew's point about offshoring is really, really valuable as if you like, a sanity check of your process mapping to make sure that people aren't lazy in your own office and think they know how they do something, and so it's not documented. So that's actually what happened for us, is that we handed over what we thought was a robust work instruction for an important piece of the offshoring work. And it wasn't. It missed 3 or 4 steps.
So,
they followed it and missed the 3 or 4 steps because you couldn't expect them not to. They weren't written down.
Communication.
It's critical. It's critical.
I think it's the assumptions that we have about things. Often it's that last 10% of that communication piece, the how we've related, and just, and then having unrealistic expectations of what you're going to get back. And I think we underestimate, because we underestimate the informal communication that happens, then we might under-deliver on the formal communications, then we're dealing with a more remote. There's a lot of things that you pick up on the by through the informal communication piece, so you have to make allowances for that. And that's, again, in any remote working environment piece. So in terms of, what would I do differently? I think that piece around upfront, the investment upfront is critical in terms, if you're going to engage in this, you can't be set and forget. You have to have a strategy for, is it the piece around whether it's sharing some, trading staff, or having a mechanism by which you can get to know, not everyone obviously, but some of the individuals, and create some sort of teaming earlier on, so the communication channels become a little bit easier. I think.
Okay, so not set and forget and communicate.
Yeah.
And one other, if you have one, Andrew, because I go to growth.
Look, I actually agree with both of those. The other point that I would say that the sort of mistake we made early on was we didn't do the whole process. We did bit parts of the process.
Right.
And that meant people didn't understand what they were doing.
The total context.
Which meant quality was poor. And it was amazing. As soon as people did the whole picture, quality uplifted. And that was one of the real critical learnings to me of the importance of that holistic approach.
I'm sure we'll come to quality in question time, because I know someone wants to ask around that. So I'm going to sneak this time now on the opportunity of upside. My proposition that in a disaggregated world of technology, where everything's disaggregated, and the concept of offshore is an old word. And in fact, things that can be onshored, or in fact maybe a word is no-shores. And if I use the thing that bugs me, and I know my team is sick of me talking about this, but the NBN is a classic one where we've invested a lot of money. And Matthias Cormann has said to me, "Oh great, Rob, do you want to buy it?" And I tell him, I won't tell you what I tell him. It's the opportunity the NBN brings of technology bringing Australia closer. If we've got speed and technology as an enabler, what is it in this country, what is it in your businesses you could be doing for someone in the global market using higher speed? How do we get everyone in Australia thinking about this much more entrepreneurial? Like Malcolm Turnbull's talking a lot about innovation and whatever. We are innovative, but we've got to think about the concepts of onshoring and technology open the global marketplace to us. Is the concept onshoring old, offshoring old?
I don't. It may be odd in terms of a concept. I think that the sense of collaboration across global borders now is readily accepted and given. And certainly through my lens, from the professional services lens, and I'm sure for others in the room as well, there is that sense that, very porous borders, you are sharing information, you are sharing IP across borders. It's not, the construct is not now that you develop IP in your own member firm and you hug it closely and don't share it. So there is that piece, but importantly our clients are operating globally and in porous borders. So when listening to your question, my partners would be listening to their clients and thinking, what do I need, what do they need, and where can I best get that to deliver it to them? And that best of what they need, it might not be in your service line office country.
No, for the firm, absolutely.
For the firm.
Somewhere.
So that's
You've got a lot of skilled, talented people around the world, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, specific to my service line, Deloitte Private Connect, which is a particular offering to the market around cloud technology and end-to-end accounting solutions. Now, that is something that is of particular relevance, not just in our market here, in Australia. It has got relevance in other markets as well. So I don't look at it as onshoring, offshoring. I just think in a globalised economy with porous borders, we are in the world of collaboration now, and whether it's from a member firm perspective, whether it's with our clients, that's how we operate.
And maybe in my thinking on this, and, you know, David, every time I discuss this, he just sort of rolled his eyes, you know, say, oh my God, what are you talking about? But who would have thought who would have thought we had the education export revenue we have now? Never would have thought that. Now, maybe you may not classify that as onshoring, but I do. So if it's, you know, it maybe people travel, but maybe technology can deliver education solutions even more. And health, for goodness sakes. We have a great health system, and maybe the technology can bring export revenues to Australia here. So I would challenge everyone in the room, for your sake and our country's sake, to think about what can you do differently that would bring the global marketplace to Australia. That's my challenge to every one of us, to face this thing in the next decade. Now, we're at a time for a few questions, right? So we have about 10 minutes for questions. We'll continue the dialogue, so don't feel obliged, but I know you're not shrinking violets either. So well, I guess we have a roving mic, or a couple around here. Do we have one? Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much. My name's Justin. When we talk offshoring, often it's paired with offshoring/automation, and sometimes it's a choice and sometimes it's paired together, and I just wouldn't mind each of you talking about that automation bit and what's preferable, or just maybe mentioning that.
One of the realisations of our journey is that as the partnership with an offshoring team has matured over 6 or 7 years, we've quickly come to realise a lot of what we've done is actually just offshore poor process, and we could have actually, in many ways, offshored to technology. So we're looking at that now. We're looking about, you know, rather than just can someone do a process for us faster, cheaper, whatever, can we actually replace that with some technological advancement? And then can you leverage off that technological advancement to do better things in other spaces as well? So it's the value proposition we keep coming back to is what is our core business and what's not our core business? And then can we partner with one, two or many in terms of using either technology or non-technological advantages to improve what we do?
Agnostic to whether it's offshoring or not, we're constantly looking at automation and where it can apply in the business. So to answer to your question, yes, but not just in that context. In the context of anything we do in our business, we look at it from an automation lens.
And I would agree. You know, I see the future being technology, and the whole activity of moving our processes offshore at the moment is a phase, and there will be a point in time that technology is able to replace the thinking that we currently apply as humans. They'll be able to program that in and produce the output that'll be of the same level of quality. And I think one of the reasons that you partner with large offshoring firms is because they will invest in that technology because they've got 200-300 clients, 100,000, 200,000 staff members in locations. So it's much more advantageous for them to spend the big dollars that technology will cost than single companies.
Yep, can't hear Billy.
Rob earmarked this question earlier about quality. I was with Rob when PwC rolled out or looked at offshoring, and so there were two elements to it. 10 years ago, offshoring had two things about it. One was lower cost, and one was taking jobs from Australia. So over the 10 years, I think, you know, as Rob experienced, and I asked this to the panel, is that the quality was better than in Australia because it's a mundane task the Australians, the bright graduates out of university didn't want to do, and so it was better quality. So I throw that question to each of the panel via you, Rob.
Thank you.
How do you see the quality? And if and when we get to a period now of maturity when we have some very good people in the offshoring area, is that a recruitment ground for Australia as well, for people to come back here, particularly helping out with cultural and other issues that they can do better than anybody in Australia can do as well? So, double-barrel question, how did quality improve, and is it a recruitment ground in the future?
As you wish.
Absolutely, quality has improved. I think you're absolutely right. It was the simple process that when initially people didn't want to do them. What I'm finding now is my team is much more energised around it because they are doing work that they actually enjoy. So the quality of the activities they're doing here onshore has improved because they're doing work that they're actually enjoying and feeling it's adding more value to the organisation. And the real critical enabler with the offshore that I've mentioned a number of times was that whole end-to-end context and getting that through. Unless you get that there, you will not get the quality. And that was a real critical step for us to make that change, to do that.
Quality is an important element, and for us it was very hit and miss to start with. But as the engagement has matured and as the process has matured and they've got a bit more of an understanding of the tertiary education landscape, the Australian tertiary education landscape, and then particularly UC, the quality has vastly improved. So much so that in the last 12 or 18 months, we've now got to the point where we're thinking, are there other opportunities we can look at with the partner that we have in terms of other things that we could argue are not core business that they might be able to do remotely for us that they can bring quality to as well. And finally, the question about onshore recruitment, we are actively looking at that as we speak. Yeah.
Echo the comments around quality. It's highly trained professionals operating in those environments, integrated as part of the teams, and the quality piece is really, really high. In terms of recruiting from those markets, not in a designated way, but certainly in terms of just tapping into those resources when you need resources quickly for particular assignments in a particular peak when you need to move quickly. That's where we tap in, and just the ability of the teams to get others on board to deliver something to clients quickly is overnight in some cases. It's fantastic. So that's the lens through which we look at it.
Excellent. Just before I go to this question here, if your attention span is short, like mine is, this infographic is an excellent one-page summary of the paper. Also, here is a QR code which will take you to all of our futuring publications on the question of robots and digital disruption. I'm not sure whether we've got hard copy out there of that paper, but we have? Oh, fantastic. Okay. So there's quite a paper there. If you don't believe that robots, etc., are going to digitally disrupt the way we operate, read that paper. It might ruin your day, but it's worth a read. You can get there, either pick one up or the QR reader will take you to the site. Question down here. Thank you.
Jared Jeremiah from Complete Wealth. I'm a former chair of the Victorian Public Practice Panel, current panel member. My question, which represents about 30% of the membership base, my question is in the main to Sneza. I just wanted to find out from you, what did you communicate to your clients that their work was being done overseas? My second question is in relation to the public practice space. It's the mid-tiers down, so they certainly don't have the resources of the Deloittes of the world. What would be some options in terms of resourcing that? And my third question is, because of this resourcing and this offshoring going overseas, are you cutting back your graduate intake program?
Good questions.
I've almost forgotten the first question.
Yeah, three questions in one.
Three questions in one.
What did you say to your clients was the first one?
Yeah, and so we openly talk to our clients. It's not something that we hide, and the important thing is the same sort of quality and processes that are in place. I mean, the review channels that exist absolutely apply to every engagement, regardless of where it's delivered and who delivers it and who is accountable for everything that gets delivered. from a Deloitte perspective. I think the last question there, I might get to that one, because I think that one is often asked, that, so do you cut back on graduate recruitment? And I can only talk from my experience, and that is to say that we don't. Because people often assume that if you look at a triangle, that where you're doing all the offshoring is down here, but it's actually along the side of the triangle. Often there are different tiers to it, and there's different aspects across every part of the delivery piece that you may engage from an offshoring perspective. So the answer to that is no, and it's actually, if you look from a growth perspective, it has been an enabler for growth, not just for us, but for other firms as well.
Sorry, can I just follow up? Do you sort of see that as there being some sort of wilderness happening if there is a lack of graduates coming through in the space of maybe a 5 to 7 year period where some of this work is being done overseas, whereas of course it's a great way to...
So the question is, just conscious of time here, but the follow-on question, we have two more and I've got to be quick now. Do we see a skills wilderness because we're not,
No,
hiring?
because as I said, I don't see graduate numbers getting cut back. It may be that people are undertaking different activities as they're going through and progressing, but the training modules we use and how we progress people through is still consistent. It may be that as people go through, they're doing less of different types of activity and broadening other skill sets. So I actually don't see it as a shortening of skills. I actually think it's an opportunity to increase the skill base as our people come through, and the opportunity to do other things. So as an engagement strategy, I actually think it's really effective. But we are not seeing that drop in graduate numbers. And I can only talk from personal experience.
I think that's right. It's a
Yeah.
very good question and good answer. I'm an optimist on this. I think we have highly educated great graduates who'll find lots of opportunities. It's only a matter of having that attitude and getting out and finding it all over the world. Now we have just a short amount of time. Sorry.
So I was going to say, if I look at it just from the big four are fighting for graduates as actively as ever. So there's the
last two questions. Conscious time, please, down here, and then one.
Hi,
I think here.
my name's Ross. I come from a different, I think from most of this room, very much through wholesaling and manufacture rather than services industry. We're very close to rolling a part of our business in supply into offshoring and done a lot of work in that area. But I've got a lot of nervousness within the business at a management level right now, and I'm struggling, I suppose, with the story to the wider business and what is the message and how do you handle that message? How do you, I'm probably looking at the next stage of going through supply to finance to very much administrative roles through the business, and finding that my executive or management team are losing faith in just how we sell this message. Can anyone help in that?
The message of which message? The
message of dipping your toe in the water and trying one part of your business and what that does to the culture of the rest of the business, or do you strip everything back and do everything at once?
Okay, so there's two parts to that question. Let's take because I'd like to answer the second part, where I see this going. Dipping the toe in the water question. That's a very good, practical, what do you do just to get started?
So look, from my experience of that, it would be don't dip parts of a process. So if you're going to do it, do your supply function, do your end-to-end supply function. Get that working, then utilise that as your message for the other parts. Success is probably the biggest power of the message in getting that through and being able to then demonstrate to people. So in my case, we've been able to demonstrate to our people around how this has actually made their roles better, how it's actually enhanced job opportunities for them, and how they've actually grown with this in moving through. And that's been one of the key enablers, but we could only do that when we actually had runs on the board. So you need to get that.
Supply end to end, and that's fine. But then the next stage is that everyone else within the business, maybe in a finance function or something else, is saying at that point, well, okay, we've done supply end to end. What's next? What are we doing? Who's next?
Well, let me take the what's next because I want to go to the last one, and it's not as robust an answer to what I think you're asking, because we could probably spend half an hour on that. Dipping the toe in the water, and it's good advice, I'll leave it at that. I actually think this started from offshoring, you're going to tell me I'm wrong, but hopefully I'm right. Offshoring years ago, menial tasks, right? Reduce the cost, do the sweatshops and shoes and all of that. Every one of those processes is important. But I can see a time where the concept of offshoring is going up in terms of the calibre of the processes, the quality of what they do, of education, of intellectual property. I was at my old firm, PwC, on a panel yesterday on digital currencies. I was a panellist like this. We did a piece of work on that. We did it with PwC. We partnered with all the firms. The guy who was the keynote speaker was in California. He was out selling his product in the... He was, let me tell you, he was onshoring using the technology in a different way of thinking about it. So your question's a really good one because it starts at the dipping the toe in through really think about how our future might look like. Now, I'm going to go to the last question because I have to wrap up.
Thanks, Rob. Patrick Durkin at the Australian Financial Review. I think I'm the media rep you warned about at the beginning.
Oh, you? Oh, God, my God.
But I think as
you look scary.
Yes, no, we're not scary. And I think as a business
Thanks
paper,
for coming.
we understand the importance of the issue. But just interested in the big future trends and just looking at the report, I just saw an interesting part there about the Trans-Pacific Partnership and talking about those free trade agreements. The conclusion in the report is that those agreements, the TPP and some of these free trade agreements are going to remove some of the barriers to offshoring and help facilitate growth in that area. And I just wondered whether the panel agree with that conclusion in the report.
Go ahead, anyone.
I mean, I can't talk for other industries and how it might impact them, but I can certainly imagine that that's going to be the impact. I mean, it hasn't been a barrier from a professional services perspective historically, but I can't comment in terms of how others are engaged, only to say that I think I support the conclusion that I think it would generally open up potentially more markets in which this could occur.
And I think just as an example for a relatively small player in the offshoring market like the University of Canberra, when we went first to do this 7 years ago, we struggled to get anybody of size or scope in the offshoring space to have any interest in us. Now we have no trouble with that. So we've got lots of tier one type organisations who are interested because they can actually see a higher education sector, not just a single university, that there may be opportunities for. So I actually think it will open it up, the opportunities, and more countries and organisations will be able to think about the opportunities this holds for them.
I'm happy with that. Are you okay with that? Thanks, Patrick. Question. I think I agree with the conclusion in our report. So, no, I really do. I think it will open it up by definition. It's just another barrier out of the way, and thanks for your question. Let me wrap up before I hand back to Duncan. First of all, by thanking Duncan and his team for all the organisation for this and get us engaged. Duncan's a great supporter of Future Inc. and we'd like you to all support him in doing it and engaging in the debate. That's what we're trying to do, is talk about issues that impact business and finance. So Duncan, to you and all of your team, thank you very much. No problem. And I'd just like to close the panel part before I hand over to Duncan. I wonder if you'd join me in thanking Andrew, Scott and Sneza, our panellists, for a great conversation. It's great to be part of it. Thank you very much.